We come to Good Friday with mixed emotions. On the one hand, we are remembering a horrific death. Crucifixion was a terrible way to die. The Gospels spare us the gruesome details. But even from what we read, we know that death on a Roman cross was slow, painful, humiliating. Moreover, this particular execution represented a breakdown of all human connections. It came about because one of Jesus' friends betrayed him, and his other friends, men who promised to stand by him, denied that they even knew him. Peter, the friend who confessed that Jesus was the Holy One of God, who had vowed to die for him, denied Jesus not once, but repeatedly. And as we know, there certainly was no justice from the religious or civil leaders. The story we read today is not a story that I'm ambiguously glad to hear. On the other hand, I've heard this story many times before. I know how it ends. In 3 days, it will be Sunday. The preacher S.M. Lockridge once wrote, "It's Friday. Jesus is praying. Peter's a-sleepin'. Judas is betrayin'. But Sunday's comin'. It's Friday. Pilate's strugglin'. The council's conspiring. The crowd is vilifying. They don't even know that Sunday's comin'." It's Friday, but Sunday's comin'. I know that if we can just white-knuckle through it these next few days, this story is going to turn out okay. Just, Jesus was betrayed and killed, but God will turn this story around. But remarkably, none of the Gospels just simply white-knuckle it through the story, waiting for Sunday. You see, each Gospel tells the story of his death clearly and explicitly. Each Gospel marks Jesus' life, even if the Gospels do not dwell on the most gruesome details. They each consciously walk us through the events which we remember this day. This event, they say, more or less directly, was the point of his life. Jesus had come for this. How then can we remember the events of this day, that we understand them as holy? How is this death an enactment rather than a betrayal? To use John's language, how do we see this as Jesus' hour? See, John's account of this long hour actually begins the evening before. Jesus washes the feet of his disciples as he talks to them about the coming events. He gives them his last teachings. He prays for them. Then he goes out with his disciples to the Kidron Valley, to a garden where he had often gone before with his friends. Judas had been able to find him rather easily. In the garden, John tells us, this friend, his betrayer, comes with a detachment of armed men. Twice, Jesus has to identify himself so that they arrest the right person. Peter draws a sword to defend them, acting as one might expect if he were protecting an ordinary kingdom. But Jesus reprimands Peter for his use of force, telling him to put the sword away. The kingdom of Jesus is not of this world. He will drink the cup that has been set before him. So Jesus comes before the religious authorities and is questioned about his teachings. Outside, Peter warms himself at the fire made by those who had arrested Jesus. Inside, Jesus can't find a witness. Jesus insists that he has spoken openly and wonders why his accusers can't find a witness to speak against him. Meanwhile, Peter denies even knowing him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. No one will admit to knowing anything about Jesus now. He's in trouble. And what you must do alone. The longest section of John's Passion narrative, longer than any other gospel, is the account of Jesus before the civil authorities. Pilate goes in and out of his headquarters, arguing with the religious leaders, debating with Jesus, showing by his movements and his questions his discomfort. He doesn't want to make this judgment. He can see clearly Pilate doesn't want to make this judgment. He just wants it all to go away. Take him yourselves and judge him yourself according to your law, Pilate tells them. But there's no backing down from the religious leaders. Pilate then asks Jesus the critical question, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus knows that Pilate doesn't really care about his answer. He's only asking because he's been pressured into it. Jesus answers that his kingdom is not from this world, which is to say that Jesus' kingdom is not established or defended in the same way that earthly kingdoms are. His kingdom is a kingdom of truth, and so often happens with political leaders. An appeal to truth confuses Pilate. Pilate doesn't give up. He suggests that Jesus could be released, part of the annual pardon program. But the crowds choose a criminal to be released instead. Pilate allows Jesus to be dressed and ridiculed as a king. Pilate's soldiers flog him, give him a crown of thorns, dress him in a royal purple robe, strike him, taunt him, bow before him. Even then, Pilate looks to Jesus to give him answers that will pacify the crowd. But self-defense is not the way of Jesus' kingdom. Jesus said that if Pilate had not been given power over him from above, Pilate would not be in the position to do anything. It's an ironic statement. Pilate is a political puppet of Rome. And yet, Jesus doesn't speak of Rome, but he speaks of the power of God, a power that Pilate does not have. Finally, Jesus' enemies demand that this impostor king be punished, unless Pilate wants to be known as an enemy of the emperor. Pilate gives in. Throughout this long exchange, John has juxtaposed Jesus' kingdom with these earthly kingdoms, making it clear that Jesus' fate was not determined by his enemies or by political powers. They did not take Jesus' life from him. He gave it willingly. So Jesus is taken out to Golgotha. He's crucified between two others, and at Pilate's insistence, a sign is put above him. This is the King of the Jews. And the soldiers divide the clothes, gamble for it. From this elevated position, Jesus sees his mother, commends her to the care of his disciple, asks for a final drink, and dies. Soldiers do not break his legs, but pierce his side to ensure he is dead. Two religiously observant men take him down from the cross because they don't want him hanging there over the holy days of Passover. He's laid in a nearby grave. The long hour has ended. We cannot hear this story of Jesus' suffering on Good Friday without thinking about the suffering of our world. We look, wars continue, violence and hatred. It still is around us. But the Son of God chose to suffer to enable life for this world. His dark hour establishes a kingdom of light for all people. He gives his life for the life of the world. In contrast, our dark hour derives from a world gone awry. As John recalled the Psalms and words from the life of Jesus, as early church recalled the words of the prophets, we are invited to recall the story of how God has been for us, and to speak of even these days in a way that acknowledges God's hand in our lives. The events of earlier make sense of the events of now. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming.